The studio lights were hot, almost blinding, but Doria Ragland didn't flinch. She sat tall, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the calm before a storm the world didn't yet realize was about to hit. The host had just asked her a seemingly harmless question, a question she'd been asked 100 times before. Doria, how proud are you of your daughter, Meghan? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The pause that followed was not normal. It stretched just long enough for the audience to sense something was wrong. You could almost hear the oxygen drain from the room. Then, with the faintest exhale, Doria leaned forward and said the words that shattered Meghan Markle's carefully built image. She rewrote her story. It wasn't yelled. It wasn't bitter. It was quiet, too quiet. But in that silence, it carried more weight than any accusation. Because for the first time, Meghan's mother wasn't smiling, wasn't defending, wasn't playing along. She was revealing. What followed was chaos. Producers backstage froze. Meghan's PR team, watching remotely, reportedly scrambled to cut the feed, but it was too late. The clip was already being shared, clipped, reposted, and dissected across every social platform within minutes. For years, Meghan had painted a picture of her upbringing as one of isolation and hardship. She told the world about growing up biracial in a world that didn't understand her, about struggling financially, about having to fight for every opportunity. She built her public identity around resilience, the girl who came from nothing and rose to royalty. But Doria, her own mother, had just flipped that entire story upside down. What would make a mother do that? What pain, what betrayal, what truth was buried deep enough to push Doria to finally speak? And why now? The timing wasn't accidental. This wasn't a tabloid rumor or a whisper from some distant cousin. This was Doria Ragland, live on national television, breaking her silence after years of being silent and invisible in her daughter's narrative. For so long, Doria was the quiet figure in Meghan's fairy tale, the yoga-teaching, dreadlock-wearing single mother who raised a future duchess against all odds. That image had been central to Meghan's brand, the Hollywood outsider who married into royalty. But now, that same image was cracking from the inside out. Viewers who tuned in expecting another soft celebrity interview instead witnessed the start of a reckoning. The host's face said it all, polite shock mixed with the instinct to dig deeper. Doria's composure was steady, almost rehearsed. But behind her calm eyes, there was something heavier, years of frustration, maybe even regret. She had been watching for too long as her daughter's story became something she no longer recognized. Meghan wasn't raised in hardship. Doria continued softly, her voice steady but weighted. She wasn't alone. She wasn't forgotten. She had love. She had support. She just stopped telling that part of it. And with that one line, Doria didn't just expose Meghan's private truth. She exposed something much larger. The myth of Meghan Markle, the self-made duchess, was suddenly under question. Because if her own mother said it was a lie, what else might have been fiction too? Think about it. How many times had Meghan told the world she grew up with next to nothing? That she ate cheap salads, couldn't afford luxury, or that her father struggled to keep the lights on? Yet Doria's words painted another image entirely. A girl who went to private schools, who had access to dance lessons, who grew up in one of Los Angeles's most comfortable neighborhoods. The contradiction was staggering. It wasn't just about money. It was about truth, or the lack of it. And while Meghan's fans rushed to defend her, insisting Doria's comments were being taken out of context, the damage was already done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Behind the scenes, people close to both women began leaking their own insights. One source described it as years of quiet resentment finally breaking loose. Another said Doria had been pushed too far after watching Meghan publicly retell her life as if her mother had been a ghost. But this wasn't just a mother correcting her daughter's memory. This was a mother breaking a silence she had been pressured to maintain, a silence that protected not only Meghan, but an entire media empire built around her story. For Doria, it seems, the line had finally been crossed. In that single interview, the power dynamic between mother and daughter inverted completely. For the first time, Doria had control of the narrative, and the world couldn't look away. Why? Because this wasn't just gossip. It was psychological warfare, played out on live television. Let's rewind for a moment. Before Meghan became a duchess, before she was the woman who escaped royal life. She was a little girl from Los Angeles. She was the daughter of a lighting director father who worked in television and a mother who taught yoga and worked in mental health. By all accounts, her childhood was stable, supported, even privileged compared to most. So where did this struggle narrative come from? That's the question that now echoes across headlines. Doria's words have forced the world to reconsider the story Meghan has told for years, a story that earned her sympathy, fame, and in many ways, her ticket into the world stage. Why now? The host asked Doria again during that live broadcast. Why speak about it today? Doria hesitated, looking down for a moment before saying, because I'm tired of pretending that silence means consent. I love my daughter, but the truth matters, too. That line hit harder than any royal scandal could. Because it didn't come from hate. It came from hurt. A mother's hurt. And if there's one thing audiences can sense instantly, it's authenticity. Online, reactions were instant. Hashtags exploded. Clips circulated faster than royal PR could react. In less than an hour, the narrative began to shift. People who once viewed Meghan as a modern victim of palace politics were suddenly asking themselves, what if the manipulation didn't start in Buckingham Palace? What if it started much earlier at home? It's a dangerous question, but one that won't go away. Because the truth about image, especially in the age of media, is that it can only hold if everyone involved plays their role. And for years, Doria played hers perfectly, silent, smiling, compliant. Until she didn't. The irony is painful. The woman Meghan once praised as her rock, her foundation, her everything, is now the one dismantling her narrative piece by piece. Some call it betrayal. Others call it justice. But maybe, just maybe, it's something far more complicated. Imagine being a mother watching your child become a global icon, knowing the version of herself she's selling isn't real. Imagine watching as your own existence, your sacrifices, your history, gets edited out of that story because it doesn't fit the brand. Would you stay silent forever? Or would you finally speak? That's the question haunting millions of viewers who watched Doria's interview that morning. The deeper irony? Doria wasn't angry. There was no venom in her tone, no sensationalism. That's what made it so believable and so devastating. She wasn't trying to destroy Meghan. She was trying to reclaim her truth. Every word she said was measured, deliberate. But behind the restraint, you could sense a mother's heartbreak. It's one thing when critics question your integrity. It's another when your mother looks into a camera and says, she rewrote her story. Behind closed doors, sources claim Meghan was blindsided. She hadn't spoken to Doria for weeks leading up to the interview. Some insiders say she thought her mother was doing a charity segment, nothing personal. Others say she was warned, but didn't believe Doria would go through with it. But Doria did. And that decision has now triggered what royal insiders are calling the Markle implosion. Meghan's image has always relied on a single thread, control. Control over her message, her image, her interviews, even her silence. But the moment her mother spoke freely, that control evaporated. Now, the world doesn't just want to know what Doria said. They want to know why. What triggered this? Was it money? Was it revenge? Or was it something far more human? The pain of being erased from your own child's history? There's another layer to this that few are brave enough to admit. Doria's revelation didn't just expose Meghan's falsehoods. It shattered her credibility on every other claim. If Meghan could lie about her upbringing, what else has she exaggerated? The royal racism accusations? The mental health struggles? The alleged isolation in the palace? That's the question now burning through headlines across the globe. And yet, there's something strangely poetic about it all. The same woman Meghan built her story around has become the one to unbuild it. The same silence that once protected her has now turned into the loudest sound in the world. If this were a movie, this would be the moment everything starts to unravel. The scene where the audience realizes the hero's story isn't what it seemed. The twist nobody saw coming. That the real conflict wasn't between Meghan and the royals, but between Meghan and the truth. And that truth had a voice. Her mother's. But this story is only beginning. Because as the cameras stopped rolling that day, something unexpected happened backstage. Something that wasn't supposed to be caught on tape, but was. Something that revealed there was even more to Doria's decision than anyone realized. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The footage wasn't supposed to exist. At least, not the version that leaked. The show had ended, credits rolled, the studio audience dismissed. But someone, maybe a crew member, maybe a producer with a guilty conscience, hit record on their phone. The camera captured Doria Ragland standing up from her chair, mic still clipped to her blouse, her eyes lowered. She looked shaken, not from regret, but from the weight of what she had just done. "Do you think she's watching?" the host asked softly, off air, perhaps trying to comfort her. Doria didn't answer. She simply exhaled, then whispered, "Oh, she's always watching." That line, that one eerie, off-the-cuff comment, became the first domino in a storm that no one could stop. Because within hours, that backstage clip was everywhere. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, millions of views, millions of opinions. People weren't just talking about what Doria said on air anymore. They were talking about what she said after the cameras stopped. She's always watching. Was it fear? Resentment? Guilt? The public didn't know, but they could feel it. By sunrise, hashtag Doria Speaks was trending worldwide. And across the ocean, in Montecito, Meghan Markle reportedly woke up to a nightmare. Her own mother had gone viral. But here's the question. What exactly was said during that interview that shook the palace so badly? What truth did Doria expose that had Buckingham Palace's crisis team on standby before breakfast? Let's rewind to that morning. It started like any other talk show, cheerful music, polite applause, a smiling host. But the energy shifted the moment Doria stepped onto the stage. You could feel it in the air. The kind of tension that only comes when someone has something to say they've been holding back for years. "Doria Ragland," the host began, "it's been quite some time since we've heard from you. The world knows you as the mother of Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. How have you been handling all the attention?" Doria smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that hides exhaustion behind grace. "It's strange," she said carefully, "to watch someone you love become a story instead of a person." The audience went quiet. You could sense the host's internal alarm bells. This wasn't going to be a fluff segment. Then came the question that changed everything. "Some people have wondered," the host said delicately, "how much of Meghan's story reflects what life was really like for you both growing up. Would you say her description of her upbringing was accurate?" Doria looked down, fidgeting with her hands. She hesitated, too long for live TV. Then she looked straight into the camera. She rewrote her story. Those 4 words detonated like a bomb. The host tried to pivot. "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" Doria didn't flinch. "People think Meghan grew up struggling. Alone. Fighting to be seen. That's not true. She had opportunities. She had people who cared. But somewhere along the way, she decided that story wasn't dramatic enough." You could almost hear the collective gasp from viewers around the world. The Duchess, the woman who'd spent years championing authenticity, was being accused of rewriting her own life by her mother. But Doria wasn't finished. "She was never invisible," Doria said softly. "She just wanted to be special. I understand that now." The audience didn't move. Even the camera operators froze, unsure whether to zoom in or cut to commercial. Somewhere inside Buckingham Palace, aides were reportedly alerted within minutes. One insider later revealed, it wasn't Meghan's reputation they were worried about. It was the institution. If Meghan's story collapses, it drags everyone she's accused down with it. And that's exactly what happened. Within hours, royal watchers, journalists, and former palace staffers began dissecting Doria's claims. Photos resurfaced. Meghan as a teenager at exclusive private schools, attending Hollywood events, smiling with extended family she once said she barely knew. The internet did what it does best, connected dots. Every contradiction became fuel. Every past interview was replayed, word for word. How could someone who attended one of LA's most expensive schools claim she worked her way through everything? How could someone who traveled internationally as a teen say she rarely left the neighborhood? And how could someone whose parents paid for private acting lessons claim she couldn't afford to dream? Those weren't just inconsistencies. They were cracks in a story millions had believed. Now, to the audience watching at home, this wasn't just celebrity drama. It felt personal. Because Meghan had sold the world a message that hard work and pain shaped her. That she was relatable. That she was one of them. But Doria's words flipped that message on its head. If Meghan had lied about her past, then maybe the pain people related to wasn't real either. And that's what truly shook the palace. Not the exposure itself, but the loss of public sympathy. Because once the world starts doubting your pain, they start doubting your purpose. Doria's calm voice replayed on loop across morning talk shows. Every outlet wanted a piece of her. But here's the part no one knew. Meghan's team had reportedly tried to stop that interview from ever airing. According to one insider, they knew Doria had been approached months before. Meghan begged her not to do it. She said it would reopen old wounds. But Doria told her, "The wound's been open for years. You just never noticed." It was the first real fracture between them that couldn't be spun or silenced. And the public sensed it immediately. Viewers described feeling torn, half pity for Doria, half disbelief that a mother would do this to her daughter. But others praised her bravery. Finally, one viral tweet read, "Someone close to Meghan is telling the truth." Meanwhile, in Montecito, sources say Meghan was furious. She reportedly locked herself away, refusing calls, while her team drafted statements blaming media manipulation. But what could they deny? The video was there. The words were hers. She rewrote her story. 3 days later, Buckingham Palace released an unusually terse statement. "This is a private family matter, and the palace will not comment." Which was curious, wasn't it? If it was purely personal, why would the palace issue any comment at all? Unless they were nervous about what else Doria might reveal. Because here's the thing. Doria's interview hinted at more than just embellished childhood stories. There were undertones of something deeper, something unspoken. When the host asked, "Do you think Meghan ever felt she had to exaggerate her past to connect with people?" Doria's answer was chilling. "I think she learned early that pain sells, and she got very good at selling it." That line set the internet on fire. Pain sells. It was a brutal statement, not from an enemy, but from her own mother. And it cut straight to the heart of Meghan's global image. Because what had Meghan built her career on? Advocacy for mental health, female empowerment, speaking one's truth. But what if the truth was curated? One journalist put it bluntly. If Doria's right, then Meghan didn't just rewrite her story, she commercialized it. And that's where the palace panic really began. Remember, Meghan's accusations during her time as a royal were seismic. Claims of racism, isolation, bullying. But if her own mother now implied she manipulates her past for sympathy, how could the palace ever clear its name? That's why insiders later admitted that Charles and William's communication teams were watching that interview live, in real time. They didn't expect Doria to side with them, but they didn't expect her to confirm their suspicions, either. Because from the moment Meghan and Harry left the monarchy, royal aides whispered about inconsistencies, timelines that didn't add up, quotes that didn't match private correspondence. But they could never prove it. And now, Meghan's own mother had done it for them, unintentionally or not. But here's the twist. People assumed Doria came forward for revenge. They were wrong. In that leaked backstage footage, you can see her eyes welling up. She wasn't proud. She wasn't celebrating. She was heartbroken. One producer later told an outlet, Doria kept saying she didn't want to hurt Meghan. She just wanted her to stop lying. Let that sink in. A mother's love doesn't disappear overnight. It just reaches a breaking point. And Doria had reached hers. The irony is almost cruel. The same silence that once protected Meghan had become unbearable. The same woman who once refused to speak to tabloids finally decided silence wasn't love. Because love, real love, doesn't enable deception. It exposes it. And that's exactly what she did. But it wasn't just Meghan's childhood being questioned now. Once people realized parts of her struggle narrative might be fiction, the floodgates opened. Old colleagues came forward. Teachers, family friends. One classmate told a reporter, Meghan wasn't struggling. She was admired. Popular. She had everything most of us wanted. A retired neighbor added, they were comfortable. Her dad worked in TV. She had designer clothes. We all liked her, but she wasn't some underdog. Bit by bit, the myth unraveled. Meanwhile, Doria vanished. No public appearances. No statements. Nothing. But her absence only made the story grow louder. Because when someone disappears after dropping a truth bomb like that, people assume there's more to tell. And there was. According to a former friend of Meghan's, the live interview was just the beginning. Doria had apparently filmed an unaired segment, one that never made it to broadcast because it was deemed too sensitive. Rumors say she discussed private letters, childhood photos, even details about Meghan's first acting jobs that didn't match her public timeline. That unseen footage became the most sought-after piece of television in the world. Every network wanted it. Every outlet begged for a copy. But none of them got it, not yet. And that's why the palace wasn't celebrating. They knew Doria had more. One insider close to King Charles reportedly said, "It's like holding a live grenade. She's the only one who can pull the pin." Meanwhile, Meghan's silence grew louder. Every day she didn't respond, the narrative solidified. People began to wonder, had Doria just said what everyone else was too afraid to? Think about it. If your entire career depended on a story and someone close to you suddenly exposed it as fiction, what would you do? Deny it and risk proof surfacing? Or stay silent and hope it blows over? Meghan chose silence. But silence has a sound of its own, and it's deafening. And the world noticed. For weeks, every headline read the same. Mother exposes Duchess. Doria speaks truth. Family rift deepens. But behind the headlines, something even more shocking was brewing. Because as it turns out, this wasn't the first time Doria had tried to tell the truth. She'd been silenced before, pressured, even threatened, according to one friend, to keep Meghan's story intact for the sake of the brand. The friend claimed, "She told me years ago, I'm tired of being erased from my own daughter's life." And now, she was finally taking that life back. Still, one question remains. What pushed Doria to finally go public, knowing the fallout it would cause? Was it guilt? Was it conscience? Or was it something, or someone, that forced her hand? Because just days before that fateful interview, Meghan and Doria reportedly had one last phone call. It ended badly. Sources say Meghan warned her, "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." To which Doria allegedly replied, "I already do." Those were the last words exchanged before the interview aired. And now, the fallout was global. Friendships fractured. Allegiances shifted. The palace stood back, quietly watching chaos consume the woman who once threatened to dismantle them. But the chaos wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because just when everyone thought the interview was the scandal, another leak surfaced. This time, from someone inside the studio. A single file, 10 minutes long, uncut. And what it contained would make the entire world question not only Meghan's truth, but Doria's motives too. What came next would ignite a firestorm neither mother nor daughter could ever control. The file appeared on a small YouTube channel with barely 1,000 subscribers. No one noticed it at first. It was titled simply, "Uncut," the Doria segment they didn't want you to see. But within hours, it exploded. By the time dawn broke, it had been shared across every major platform. 10 minutes of raw, unedited footage, Doria off script, off guard, and heartbreakingly honest. That's where Chapter 2 begins. When people clicked play, the screen flickered for a moment, and then there she was, Doria sitting alone under dim studio lights, unaware the cameras were still rolling. Her voice was lower, quieter now, stripped of media polish. "She always needed a story," Doria murmured, staring down at her hands. Something to make her life bigger than it was. A production assistant, trying to be polite, asked if she meant Meghan. Doria gave a slow, tired nod. She'd say things like, "People love struggle, Mom. They want to see transformation. But how do you transform when you never fell in the first place?" That single line tore through the internet like lightning. It was brutal, poetic, and painfully revealing. The world had seen Meghan Markle as the self-made girl who fought her way out of obscurity. But according to her own mother, there was no obscurity, no hunger, no hardship. Just a comfortable life reimagined into a narrative that sold better. And that's when it hit people. This wasn't just about a family disagreement. It was about authenticity itself. How much of what we believe about celebrities, about royals, about inspirational journeys is actually true? Let's break it down. For years, Meghan told the world about her childhood struggles. The mixed-race girl who didn't fit in, who ate on a $5 budget, who worked for every scrap of recognition. She described a life of exclusion, of being unseen and unheard. It became the foundation for everything. Her activism, her identity, her marriage into the royal family. But Doria's account painted a very different picture. In that leaked footage, she spoke of a girl surrounded by privilege, private tutors, a father who worked in television and pulled industry strings, a home filled with opportunity. "We weren't rich," Doria said softly, "but we were fine. Better than fine." She had dance classes, good clothes, vacations. She was never the underdog she claims to be. The contradiction was staggering. And yet, if you listen closely, you can hear something else beneath Doria's words. Not malice, but disappointment. Like a mother realizing too late that her daughter had turned their ordinary life into fiction. She used to say, "No one cares about normal," Doria added in that clip. I guess she was right. Pause for a second and think about that. No one cares about normal. That's the mantra of Hollywood, the DNA of celebrity culture, but coming from a mother, it's chilling. Because it means Meghan didn't just fabricate struggle, she believed she had to. The audience watching the uncut footage felt something shift. For years, Meghan had been both adored and criticized, but now, the doubt hit differently. This wasn't tabloid gossip. It was a confession from the one person who raised her. And then came the moment that stunned everyone. Doria's voice cracked slightly as she said, she wanted to be special so badly, she forgot she already was. Those words landed like a punch to the chest. For the first time, Doria wasn't accusing, she was mourning. Mourning the daughter she used to know. Mourning the honesty they'd lost somewhere between the Hollywood spotlight and the palace gates. But it's what came next that set the world on fire. In the same recording, Doria hinted that some of Meghan's struggles, the ones she often recounted in interviews, were strategically timed. There were times she'd call me before an appearance, Doria said. She'd say, "Mom, what can I say that sounds real?" I didn't understand then what she meant. Now I do. The production assistant, his voice barely audible, asked, "Are you saying Meghan rehearsed pain?" Doria didn't answer. She just sighed. Long, heavy, knowing. That silence said more than words ever could. You can almost feel the tension through the screen. The woman who once sat behind Meghan at her royal wedding, smiling proudly, was now peeling back the layers of a performance she could no longer endorse. And that's when public opinion began to fracture completely. Half of the world was furious. How dare Doria expose her daughter like this? A mother's loyalty, they argued, should be sacred. But the other half couldn't help but see her as brave, a woman finally refusing to carry someone else's lie. But here's where things get darker. Because Doria wasn't the only one starting to talk. After the uncut footage went viral, journalists began digging into Meghan's supposed early hardships. Within days, they found records showing she attended the private Immaculate Heart High School, where tuition cost thousands per year, hardly the working class background she often implied. Former classmates described a cheerful, confident girl who was well-liked and socially active, not the isolated outsider she claimed to be. One former teacher told a London paper, she wasn't the underdog. She was ambitious. She knew she was destined for something big, and she wasn't shy about it. And so the myth began to crumble. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, the situation was being watched closely. Royal advisors reportedly saw the interview as vindication. One aide allegedly told The Times, "It explains so much. Her ability to twist a narrative, even one about her own family, we saw that here too." But if the palace felt relieved, they didn't show it. Publicly, they remained silent. They knew better than to gloat. Because this wasn't just a PR crisis for Meghan, it was a reckoning for everyone who'd believed her. And perhaps the most devastating part? Doria hadn't even revealed everything yet. That leaked segment was only the first of 3 she filmed that day. The other 2, according to the network, were legally sensitive and withheld from broadcast. People began to speculate. What could possibly be more damaging than this? Some pointed to a line cut from the original airing, where Doria allegedly said, "It's not that she lied. It's that she edited reality to make herself the hero." If true, that sentence alone could redefine how the public sees Meghan forever. But let's step back for a moment. Let's ask the question no one dares to. Why would Meghan create a narrative of struggle in the first place? Fame isn't born from truth, it's born from resonance. Pain connects. Pain sells. Pain makes people believe you're real. And for Meghan, whose Hollywood career stalled before royal life revived it, authenticity was her currency. Every hardship, every tearful anecdote, every tale of rejection wasn't just storytelling, it was strategy. That realization hit audiences like a slap. The same woman who said she was silenced had apparently scripted her silence. The same woman who said she fought for her voice had been controlling the script all along. And yet, you can't help but feel something human underneath it all. Was this calculated manipulation, or a deep insecurity dressed in royal silk. Maybe she wasn't lying to deceive. Maybe she was lying to belong. Because when Doria spoke about Meghan's need to be seen, it didn't sound vindictive. It sounded maternal. She always felt like she had to prove she deserved attention, Doria said, even when she had it. That's not hatred. That's heartbreak. And heartbreak is harder to process than scandal. The internet went wild, but Doria went quiet again. She didn't respond to press inquiries, didn't release statements. It was as if she had vanished back into the shadows, leaving her words to echo on their own. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp fought to contain the fallout. Sources close to her called it character assassination. But every denial only deepened the intrigue. People wanted receipts, and Doria's interview had given them just enough to start connecting the dots themselves. Old footage of Meghan's speeches resurfaced. Quotes about scraping by, about working-class roots, about self-made independence. But juxtaposed with yearbook photos, high-end vacations, and glowing school reports, the narrative fell apart. And it wasn't just her childhood at stake anymore. If Meghan had rewritten her beginnings, what about everything else? It's easy to forget that before the tiaras, before the palace gates and endless headlines, Meghan Markle was just a girl in Los Angeles, a city that builds dreams for some and illusions for everyone else. Doria remembers those years differently than her daughter does, not as a tale of struggle and survival, but as the quiet, glittering rise of a girl who learned early how to play a part and make it believable. The Hollywood years were supposed to be their golden time, mother and daughter against the world. They had each other. Doria worked hard, balancing jobs in mental health and yoga instruction, while Meghan pursued acting classes and networking events. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't poverty either. They lived comfortably enough to afford what mattered: schooling, extracurriculars, opportunity. Yet, even then, the seeds of contradiction were already taking root. From the outside, they looked close, inseparable, even. Photos from the time show them laughing at the beach, visiting friends, attending family gatherings. But Doria later confessed that something about Meghan began to shift when she started auditioning. She learned early that image could change everything. Doria recalled, "If people believed a story about you, they'd open doors for you." That's how Meghan began experimenting with identity. One day she'd emphasize her biracial heritage. The next she'd try to pass as ethnically ambiguous. Casting directors noticed. Some called her versatile. Others called her calculated. But for Meghan, it wasn't deception, it was survival. In Hollywood, truth doesn't pay rent. Stories do. Still, Doria never expected her daughter's reinvention to reach the scale it later would. "I thought she was just trying to fit in," Doria said during that same off-air conversation. "I didn't realize she was rewriting herself from scratch." There's an old saying in Los Angeles: fame isn't about who you are, it's about who you can convince people you are. Meghan understood that better than anyone. She began polishing her background in interviews long before royal fame. Early press pieces described her as a self-made girl from a humble background. It sounded inspiring. It sounded relatable. But it wasn't true. Behind every humble anecdote was a safety net. Parents who paid for her lessons, teachers who recommended her, industry connections through her father's TV work. Doria watched it all happen, proud but quietly uneasy. "I didn't mind the exaggerations," she later admitted. "Actors do that all the time." But when she started believing them, that's when I got scared. Because belief is contagious. Once Meghan convinced herself she was the underdog, she started behaving like one, always needing to prove, to outshine, to control the narrative. And Doria, ever the peacemaker, tried to keep up. She defended her daughter's ambitions, ignored the fabrications, told herself it was harmless. But deep down, she knew she was losing her. Hollywood had a way of reshaping people. Meghan's social circle expanded. Her ambitions did too. She mingled with producers, dated briefly within the industry, and learned quickly how to charm a room. She could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the world, one former acting coach said. But when the lights went out, that charm disappeared. It was rehearsed. To Doria, it was heartbreaking. The sweet, curious little girl who once danced in the kitchen was now analyzing how she was perceived. Every conversation had an agenda, every smile a purpose. "Sometimes she'd ask me to tell stories about when she was little," Doria said, "but only the sad ones. the ones that made her look brave. That's how it started, the editing of memory. In those years, the mother-daughter dynamic slowly inverted. Doria became the quiet observer, while Meghan became the narrator. Whatever Meghan said became the official version of events, even if it wasn't quite real. There's one story Doria used to love telling, a memory from when Meghan was 12. She had organized a small charity drive at school, collecting clothes for underprivileged kids. It wasn't glamorous, but it was genuine. Meghan felt proud. But years later, Doria heard her recount the same story on television. Only this time, Meghan said she'd done it to survive being bullied. Doria blinked in disbelief. She turned a kind moment into a tragedy, she later told a friend. And people loved her for it. That's when Doria realized how powerful her daughter's gift for storytelling had become. Meghan didn't just perform, she reinvented. She turned her life into a screenplay and the world into her audience. And Hollywood rewarded her for it. When she landed her breakout role in Suits, Meghan called Doria in tears, of joy, not sadness. "We made it, Mom," she said. Doria was proud. She flew to Toronto to visit the set once, quietly watching from behind the cameras. Her daughter looked radiant, confident, alive. But something else was different too. The warmth between them had cooled. Meghan was surrounded by stylists, assistants, producers. Conversations were brief, mechanical. She had people now, Doria recalled. People who told her what to wear, what to say, who to be. Still, Doria kept her distance. She didn't want to interfere. But as Meghan's fame grew, her version of their shared history grew more dramatic and more distorted. She'd say things like, "Mom and I had to fight through everything." I'd hear that and think, fight through what? We had a roof. We had food. We had love. Doria wasn't angry. She was bewildered. I used to think maybe she remembered things differently. Memory can be tricky. But then I realized she remembered exactly what she wanted people to hear. This was the beginning of what Doria would later call the quiet erasure. The mother who raised her was slowly being rewritten out of her daughter's narrative, not as an act of hate, but as a casualty of branding. When Meghan began giving interviews about being a self-made woman, Doria's phone stopped ringing. The last time she tried to correct a small detail, a timeline, a family anecdote, Meghan reportedly snapped, "Mom, people don't need every fact. They need a feeling." That line stayed with Doria for years. They need a feeling. It summed up everything that came next. Because in Hollywood, facts bore people. Feelings make them stay. And Meghan had mastered the art of making people stay. Still, there were brief glimpses of the girl Doria once knew. Late-night phone calls when Meghan confessed she was tired of pretending. Moments when fame felt hollow, when she longed for simplicity again. But those moments never lasted, Doria said. By morning, she'd be someone else again, polished, perfect, invincible. When Meghan met Prince Harry, Doria saw a flicker of hope. Maybe love would ground her, bring her back to something real. Instead, it elevated her performance. The royal narrative gave her a new script, a new stage, and Doria watched helplessly as her daughter's life became less about truth and more about spectacle. But even back then, before the wedding, before the chaos, Doria sensed it couldn't last. "She stopped needing me," Doria admitted quietly. "Not because she stopped loving me, but because I knew too much." That's the tragedy of it, isn't it? The person who knows the real you becomes a threat when your identity depends on illusion. Hollywood taught Meghan how to control her story. The monarchy gave her the biggest audience she'd ever have. And somewhere between those two worlds, the real Doria and Meghan disappeared, replaced by characters that looked like them but no longer recognized each other. By the time Meghan was preparing to marry into royalty, Doria had become the symbol of quiet grace, the smiling mother in the audience, the woman who said nothing while the world speculated. But inside, she was already breaking. In one unaired clip from her interview, Doria confessed, "I stayed silent because she asked me to." She said, "Mom, silence protects me. I didn't know it meant erasing myself." That confession reframed everything. Doria's silence wasn't distance, it was obedience. She had been following her daughter's script all along. And when Meghan's version of her childhood started to dominate global headlines, Doria's reality was pushed further into the shadows. Friends say she kept journals during those years, quiet entries about small moments, birthdays missed, phone calls unanswered, photographs she wasn't allowed to share. Each page was a mother's invisible presence in a daughter's public dream. She used to call me her foundation, Doria said. But you can't see the foundation when someone's building a castle on top of it. Because the person who helped Meghan rewrite her story wasn't a stranger. It was someone very, very close. And their identity would change everything. The world remembers the Oprah interview as the moment Meghan Markle finally spoke her truth. But what if that truth wasn't hers to begin with? What if, as Doria Ragland would later imply, that televised confession was the culmination of years of careful scripting, a narrative perfected long before Meghan sat under that California sky? When Oprah leaned forward and asked, "Were you silent or were you silenced?" the question became iconic. Meghan's answer, the latter, was rehearsed, elegant, devastating. It gave her control of the narrative. But as Doria watched from home, her heart sank. Because she knew the truth behind that moment wasn't liberation. It was theater. "I remember turning off the TV halfway through," Doria later admitted to a close friend. "Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't recognize her." The fallout from that interview didn't just shake Buckingham Palace. It fractured a family that had already been breaking in silence. The world saw a duchess in pain, a woman oppressed by the cold machinery of royalty. Doria saw something else, her daughter performing her greatest role yet, the misunderstood heroine. "She was telling stories we used to talk about when she was a teenager," Doria said in an unaired clip. "Except back then, they were just metaphors. Now, they'd become facts." In those 2 hours with Oprah, Meghan painted herself as the isolated outsider, battling an ancient institution. The audience cried. Headlines exploded. Sympathy flooded in. But Doria couldn't shake the feeling that something had been stolen, not just from the royals, but from her too. Because that story, the lonely girl who grew up misunderstood, had once been theirs, a private metaphor they used to navigate life's hardships. Doria used to tell Meghan, "Even when you feel unseen, you're never unloved." It was their phrase, their bond. And now, it had been repurposed into global branding. After the interview aired, Doria's phone didn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in, from friends, journalists, even strangers. Everyone wanted a comment. Everyone wanted her perspective. But she stayed silent. She told herself she was doing the right thing again, protecting her daughter, upholding loyalty. But silence this time felt different. It didn't feel noble. It felt complicit. Because as Doria watched Meghan tell the world she'd been abandoned, she knew the truth. She had been there all along. She had called. She had visited. She had listened. She just hadn't been useful to the narrative. And in Hollywood, if you're not useful, you're expendable. Watching her talk about loneliness, Doria said later, "I realized she was rewriting not just her childhood anymore. She was rewriting me." The public never saw that side of the story. To them, Doria was the supportive mother. The picture of grace, silent but proud. But behind that stillness was grief. The kind of grief only a parent can understand, watching their child succeed by erasing them. And when Meghan spoke about dark thoughts and feeling trapped, Doria wept. Not because she doubted her daughter's pain, but because she recognized the performance of it. She wasn't lying, Doria said softly. But she wasn't telling the truth either. She was telling the version that hurt the most. That's what made the interview so powerful and so dangerous. It blurred the line between experience and narrative, between confession and manipulation. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides were furious. One senior official reportedly slammed his notepad down and muttered, "We'll never recover from this." Another called the accusations nuclear-level propaganda. But behind closed doors, some suspected that Meghan's story wasn't as airtight as it seemed. "The problem with half-truths," said one palace insider, "is that the half you hide always finds a way to show itself." And that's exactly what happened, because Doria, whether she intended to or not, became that missing half. In the weeks after the interview, her name trended worldwide again. Not for something she said, but for what she didn't. People noticed how carefully she avoided endorsing Meghan's claims. Reporters swarmed her street, asking whether she stood by her daughter's version of events. Doria gave the same answer every time, no comment. But silence, once again, spoke volumes. Online sleuths dissected every photo of her, every gesture, every interview she'd ever done. And then they found something. a brief appearance in a charity video from months before the Oprah interview. In it, Doria said, "You can't rewrite pain. You can only heal it." That single line set the internet ablaze. Some called it cryptic. Others called it confirmation. But everyone agreed. It sounded like a mother's warning. Behind the scenes, the damage was spreading fast. The palace had launched internal reviews. Meghan's team was scrambling to contain fallout. And Doria? She was withdrawing. Friends said she stopped answering calls altogether, even from family. She didn't want to pick a side, said one friend. But she realized her silence was already being used as a weapon by both of them. Still, she couldn't escape the noise. Everywhere she went, she heard fragments of her daughter's voice replayed on screens. The same sound bites, the same tears, the same claim. "They tried to silence me." But Doria couldn't stop thinking. If Meghan was silenced, who was she silencing? Because in that interview, Meghan didn't just expose the monarchy. She erased everyone who'd ever helped her climb. Teachers, friends, family, and her own mother most of all. She made it sound like she was completely alone. Doria said, her voice trembling, as if love wasn't enough for her anymore unless it came with applause. That's what haunted her. The applause, the validation, the transformation of truth into performance. When Oprah's producers reached out to Doria for a follow-up appearance, she declined immediately. She knew what they wanted, the emotional mother confirming the tragedy, completing the picture. But Doria couldn't do it. Because it wasn't true, she said later. Not the way they wanted it to be. But even without Doria's participation, the damage was irreversible. Overnight, Meghan became both hero and villain. To some, she was brave. To others, manipulative. To Doria, she was simply lost. She's living in a world of echoes now. Doria wrote in her journal. Every truth she speaks comes back to her as applause, not accountability. And when those echoes finally reached Doria's own doorstep, she couldn't stay quiet any longer. 2 weeks after the Oprah interview aired, Doria gave her first off-the-record comment to a journalist she trusted. It wasn't long, but it was devastating. She said, "Meghan's truth isn't a lie. It's just not the only truth." That sentence cracked open the entire facade, because it suggested something deeper, that there were multiple versions of the same story. And Meghan's was just the most marketable one. The headline that followed read, "Doria Ragland breaks silence, gently contradicts daughter's claims." It didn't matter that she hadn't meant it as an attack. The world pounced. By the next morning, every outlet was running with variations of the same story. Meghan's mother doesn't back her up. The narrative was slipping, and Meghan knew it. According to one source, she called Doria that night. "You've ruined everything," she reportedly said. "Do you know what you've done?" But Doria, for the first time in years, didn't apologize. "I told my truth," she said. "The same thing you said you wanted." That call ended with silence, the kind that feels like a goodbye. For Doria, it was a moment of painful freedom. But for Meghan, it was a betrayal she couldn't forgive. Because in Meghan's world, there could only be one truth, hers. And from that point on, everything began to unravel. Within days, whispers emerged that Doria had kept evidence, letters, notes, even voice messages, contradicting parts of Meghan's public claims. At first, no one believed it. But then came a single leaked photo, a page from one of Doria's journals. It read, March 2019, she said she was alone. I was there. That one line was enough to destroy months of careful image building. It became the symbol of the Oprah fallout, a mother's quiet correction of her daughter's loudest truth. The royal family, though publicly restrained, reportedly viewed the leak as vindication. "She's not our problem anymore," one aide said. Her own mother's saying it now. And still, Doria refused to exploit it. She didn't go on tours or sign deals. She didn't write books. She just stopped lying by omission. But the silence from Meghan's side grew deafening. Friends close to her described paranoia, an obsession with controlling the story again. She thought everyone was turning against her, one insider said. She even suspected Oprah of betrayal. That's how far it had gone. The woman who once captivated the world with authenticity was now trapped by her own narrative. And the mother who once vowed to stay silent was finally breaking free. But what neither of them knew was that the Oprah fallout wasn't just about a family conflict anymore. It had triggered something far more dangerous. a race within the media to uncover the rest of Doria's journals and letters. Because if those documents proved Meghan's version of events was fabricated, the entire house of cards, her memoirs, her speeches, her brand, could collapse overnight. And the person who had the key to that collapse wasn't in London. She was sitting quietly in Los Angeles, with a locked chest at the foot of her bed. Inside it were the letters Meghan thought she'd destroyed. And soon, those letters would surface, exposing not just a daughter's deceit, but a mother's deepest regret. Because as Doria once wrote, you can hide the truth for years, but one day it always finds its way home. And when it finally does, home will never look the same again. Fame, as Doria Ragland would later say, is like smoke, beautiful when the light hits it just right, but impossible to hold on to. And for Meghan Markle, Hollywood had taught her exactly how to manipulate that light. She learned early that the illusion mattered more than the truth, and that once people believed the illusion, truth became irrelevant. After the Oprah fallout, that illusion began to crack in public. But to understand how it all started, you have to go back to the years when Meghan first stepped into Hollywood's golden maze, when her image wasn't yet royal, but already calculated to perfection. Those were the years when she became a master illusionist. She always understood perception, Doria later said. She knew how to make people see what she wanted them to see. But she forgot, illusions cost something. The cost, as it turned out, was everything. Hollywood adored Meghan's confidence. Casting directors said she walked into auditions like she owned the room. She had that rare blend of warmth and ambition, the kind that made you want to trust her. But behind that charm was strategy. Every outfit, every quote, every smile was curated to build an image of the underdog who was destined to rise. She was good at it, said a former publicist. Really good, she'd say. If people think I've struggled, they'll root for me. If they think I'm privileged, they'll resent me. She always played the long game. That long game became the foundation of her empire. When Meghan wasn't getting the role she wanted, she created her own narrative online. Her lifestyle blog, her charity appearances, her interviews. Each one carefully positioned her as relatable yet aspirational. Not quite Hollywood elite, not quite ordinary. She lived in the sweet spot of sympathy and envy. But every illusion needs an anchor, something that makes it believable. For Meghan, that anchor was her story, the humble beginnings, the struggle to be seen, this self-made success. It was her brand. And Hollywood, always hungry for authenticity, devoured it. Doria saw it unfolding and tried to warn her. The more perfect your story sounds, she told her daughter once, the harder it'll be to live inside it. But Meghan didn't listen. People don't want reality, Mom, she said. They want a dream they can believe in. And that was exactly what she became, a dream people believed in. The illusion worked. Suits made her famous. The royal marriage made her legendary. Every red carpet, every interview reinforced the same mythology. Meghan, the girl who beat the odds. Except she hadn't. Behind the glamour, Doria knew the truth. There were no odds to beat. There was opportunity. There was privilege. There was support. But hardship? That was marketing. She took comfort and turned it into struggle. Doria wrote in her journal. Not because she had to, but because it sold better. Still, Hollywood didn't care. They rarely do. They loved a woman who could craft her own legend. And Meghan, ever the student of image, took notes from the best. She studied Oprah, Michelle Obama, even Diana. She understood symbolism, posture, tone. The subtle cues that make people believe they're seeing authenticity. But authenticity is a fragile performance. The first cracks appeared after she married Harry. Suddenly, the illusion of the Hollywood outsider collided with the reality of royal protocol. The same skills that helped her manipulate the media began to backfire. The palace didn't play by Hollywood rules, they played by hierarchy. And hierarchy, no matter how you spin it, doesn't bend easily to storytelling. She thought she could control the narrative like she always had, one former royal staffer said. But this time, the stage was bigger, and the audience had seen this play before. The illusion began to slip. First, it was small things, stories that didn't match up, timelines that shifted, quotes that contradicted. Then came the bigger ones, feuds, staff resignations, contradictions in interviews. Every inconsistency became a headline, every half-truth a debate. And while Meghan blamed the media for twisting her words, Doria knew better. She wasn't being twisted, Doria said quietly. She was being revealed. The image of the misunderstood Duchess was beautiful, too beautiful. It relied on perfection, and perfection always collapses under its own weight. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Doria watched her daughter's fame morph into something darker. Meghan's every move was analyzed, dissected, weaponized. But even as the world turned on her, Meghan refused to adjust. She doubled down on the illusion. She thought if she repeated her version of the story long enough, it would become the truth, Doria told a friend. And maybe it did for her. But the problem with illusions is they require constant maintenance. That's when the pressure started showing. Meghan's staff described her as obsessive about headlines. Every critical article was an attack. Every dissenting voice was betrayal. The walls between her and reality grew thicker by the day. She stopped listening, Doria said. Even to me. Their relationship, once fragile but functional, fractured completely after the Oprah interview. Meghan reportedly accused Doria of feeding the press. Doria denied it, but the accusation stung. That was when I realized she didn't see me as her mother anymore, Doria wrote in her notes. She saw me as a liability. The tragedy of Hollywood's illusion is that it always eats its creators. The moment the audience senses a lie, the magic disappears. And once it's gone, there's no bringing it back. For Meghan, that moment came when her own mother's words began trending. She rewrote her story. The illusion cracked, and through it, the truth began to seep out. The fallout wasn't just external. Inside Meghan's circle, panic set in. PR teams were replaced. Legal threats were drafted. Friends were vetted. Every whisper felt like betrayal. And in that paranoia, she made the same mistake every illusionist makes. She tried to control what couldn't be controlled. Because once truth escapes, it doesn't come back quietly. The media began revisiting old stories, contradictions about Meghan's childhood, her early career, her family estrangement. Every re-examination chipped away at the myth she'd built. The girl who rose from nothing was starting to look like the girl who invented everything. And while Meghan fought to hold her image together, Doria was fighting her own battle, guilt. She blamed herself for letting it get this far, for keeping silent when the lies began, for helping build the illusion she now regretted. I let her sell a dream that didn't exist, Doria said. I thought it was harmless. I was wrong. The letters she'd kept, the ones Meghan thought were gone, became her only tether to reality. Proof that beneath the glittering illusion, there had once been truth. A real girl, a real bond, a real family. But now, even those letters were dangerous. Because in a world where the illusion is collapsing, truth isn't comforting. It's combustible. Insiders began whispering that several media outlets had offered Doria money, 6 figures, for exclusive rights to the letters. She refused. But her refusal only made them more valuable. Everyone wanted to see them. Everyone wanted to know what they said. And among those desperate to suppress them was Meghan herself. According to a leaked memo from one of her lawyers, Meghan considered taking preemptive legal measures against her mother. The memo, later leaked to the press, read, Ms. Ragland's possession of private correspondence constitutes potential defamation exposure. Imagine that. A daughter preparing to sue her mother to keep her story intact. Doria never filed a response. She didn't need to, because she knew something Meghan didn't, that Hollywood doesn't care about lawsuits. It cares about spectacle. And the bigger the scandal, the faster the illusion burns. By then, the illusion had become its own monster, a machine too large for Meghan to control and too public for Doria to escape. Every interview Meghan gave sounded more defensive. Every silence from Doria sounded more truthful. The public, once enchanted, began to turn. The woman who had once embodied empowerment now symbolized contradiction. And the mother who once symbolized quiet support now symbolized painful honesty. It was the perfect reversal. But the irony? Doria never wanted the spotlight. She didn't crave the cameras or the attention. She only wanted peace. She wanted her daughter to stop pretending long enough to breathe again. She's living in a world of mirrors, Doria said quietly. And mirrors only show you what you want to see. That's Hollywood's final illusion, reflection without reality. But there was one reflection Meghan couldn't control, her mother's. Because Doria had kept one thing the world hadn't yet seen, a video diary. Private recordings she'd made during the early days of Meghan's career, long before royalty and scandal. Recordings that showed who Meghan really was before the illusion took hold. And one of those tapes, as fate would have it, was about to surface. It wasn't leaked by Doria. It wasn't leaked by the media. It came from someone much closer, someone inside Meghan's own circle who had grown tired of keeping her secrets. And once that tape aired, Hollywood's perfect illusion would finally shatter. Because in that recording, the real Meghan wasn't talking to the press. She was talking to her mother. And what she said that night would change everything.